Welcome back to the Technocommunism Conversation, where we have frequently in recent weeks and months discussed concepts around revolutionary cybernetic socialism, method of transforming our society away from this Western dominated thing that is killing humankind, toward a thing that is fundamentally a humane and sustainable economic system. And I'm going to touch upon some ideas that generally um, um, relate to what I've described as the agentariat or AI agentic network on this show quite frequently. Namely, this discipline in computer science around multi-agent systems, something that's been well understood um, for some years, to some degree, well understood for some years before the emergence of the kind of open source large language models with these agentic qualities, or the ability to reflect upon their actions and have thus the capacity for further planning and insight, being more useful to human beings, which is of use to you if you're interested in, say, transforming your workplace. Let's say you're lucky enough to be a freelancer with access to these kinds of things, which is a fairly rare luxury, for most people. It's why you should not listen to technologists who say the problem here is that you just need additional training. If you just retrain in computer science, for example, you'll your life will be transformed. That, of course, is an incredibly reductive view of the social milieu, and of it's just elitist double talk, really. Um, there's um, on the other hand, I was talking to a person who's known to be um, have a virtuoso level skill in computer programming, and has published materials reflecting that. And when I was telling this person about this a concept of the AI agentic class, one of the first people I spoke to about this before I started live streaming about it every day or every few days, um, he said, "Yeah, that's pretty good." And then he said, you can be a political philosopher, a planner in this area," suggesting correctly that I don't have the level of understanding of a computer science that someone like himself does. This comes back to what I was saying a moment ago, because you can go to mistral.ai right now and get 99.9% of the information that this person, who's a busy human being, would give you in that context, say, to help you bridge the gap between being a schmuck like Ben Zion and a person like the aforementioned programming virtuoso. Mistral AI can do that. Of course, other companies that I like less, like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, can do that, and a half a dozen others. But I'm going to tend to recommend the one that would be able to do the job and also is more or less operating to some degree within the on the principles of open source. The Mistral organization is not a fully non-for-profit, but nevertheless they are better than those others. So that's I titled this show live from Technocommunism Mission Control because I'm indoors instead of usually I'm doing this show outside, which I like. But for the sake of simplicity, it doesn't probably give a lot more information. But kind of on a summer break. And so I'll be able to I'll be doing these shows in the office more easily. And that is good because for about the next month, I'll be able to start having meetings toward the building of this operation that we would call the agentariat, In fact, I have one this weekend. I'm working on these things in a different way than merely proselytizing on the subject, which in this world where nearly every Westerner is a effective techno-fascist, effective fascist sympathizer, upholding the system that's killing the planet. Of course, the people I've tagged in this video, some of you are scientific socialists, people who I would generally call friends of the revolutionary cybernetic socialist, and many of you have come, I think, to understand in recent years, as I have, that something like revolutionary cybernetic socialism, making use of advanced computing, the most powerful revolutionary tool that's ever existed, to transform our society in the remaining time that we have less than 5 years before this planet reaches runaway overheating, wherein in the years to follow, the climate will become inhospitable to human life. Already, last summer, the temperature reached 160 degrees in certain parts of the world for a short number of days. That is a temperature at which human life will not thrive. And that is going to be increasingly your reality, particularly after approximately 2029. And why is that? Is that an unfortunate situation, an act of God beyond our control? No. It is largely owing to the United States military-industrial complex, the world's worst polluter, whose only real job on the world stage is to protect other super polluters, creating an international fascistic regime in effect. And it's down to 3 sectors in particular. That military-industrial sector we could describe as one, the other being fossil fuels generally, and there's, of course, overlap between those two. And then the third is livestock systems, which is a close second in raw damage done to fossil fuels. Studies have revealed in recent years. So it's not down to individual lifestyles. It's down to the toppling of and changing of institutions. Those are more or less the same thing. But those 3 things have got to be stopped. And by and large, people in the West are greenwashing, telling themselves that because they've added some new sector that is environmentally harmful, that somehow that is reducing things in these other areas, taking no steps, making no plans to do that in the time frame described. No, there's no adults in the room in this entire world. So I mentioned that I'm working from the home office instead of doing these shows from the park, as I sometimes want to do. I've been doing those. I did one show a week, or one show a day, after a ghost from my past came back and I began to insinuate that I stopped doing the show on the subject, revolutionary cybernetic socialism. I immediately hung up on them when they started to say this. So rather than doing less shows, as they suggested, I took it as a sign that this fascist sympathizer had identified that some of these ideas were becoming more significant and therefore more irksome to them, so that I should do more shows. And as I said, in this world where we have, at least in the West, the near ubiquity of effects like that of Project Mockingbird, causing people to be fascist sympathizers, then this is the best thing that you can do, is scream from the rooftops that the system must be changed, and suggesting ways in which the system could be changed, as I have tried to do in articulating this AI agentic class, which we could describe as an evolution of the well-understood working class of the 1800s and 1900s, into a thing which is empowered by something like open source large language models, which are now easily downloadable and which can be used if you've had a chance to play with Llama 3, the head of the Meta organization said about 2 months ago that Llama 3 was going to be artificially generally intelligent. Such claims have been made about chatbots in the last 2 years, and generally they're kind of laughed at. But at the same time, I'm hard pressed to see this thing that can transform your work products so dramatically. I'm able to generate, and this has happened in the course of an afternoon, 15 white papers on different subjects of interest to me with almost no effort that could be more or less at the level of something that could be published in a serious academic journal. I'm hard pressed to see such a digital assistant as not being a pretty significant step toward general intelligence. There's a tendency to move the goalposts on these things quite a lot, and I think that's to some degree what is done when discussing these things. Yes, I mentioned that I'm not going to be doing this show in the park for a few days. A part of that is because I'm going to be able to be on this kind of winter break and be able to start actually working more with the open source LLMs, work with the network of volunteers such as they are, who are going to test this hypothesis that this AI agentic class could become a thing by helping to modify the current, most current available and useful open source LLM to this purpose of being able to interoperate with other LLMs across the network, creating what I describe on this show frequently as a click-through kind of process on the part of the user, wherein projects can be spearheaded, but the user themselves, the network of users, might not even need to be awake. They would have to have their computer on. Their computer would have to have a GPU at this earliest of stages, and then they could answer, participate in a few very simple communiques, say yes or no questions throughout the course of day or week, to continue to steer and grow the project that's being undertaken there. So that's effectively would be a proof of concept of a significant, not only intelligence enhancer of the kind that I've described, of being able to write white papers that you couldn't have written on your own, but a workforce multiplier of doing this kind of work in this more agentic context with a group. And as I've said, if this group were today, let's say 200,000 people distributed around the world, and the agentic quality were such of the kind that I think will emerge in 2024, 2025 at the latest, projects with 200,000 people on the scale of, say, going to the city of Lagos in Nigeria and helping them build something that they've planned to build for quite some time, a desalination plant that would provide potable water to 25 million people in that area that's a coastal city, provide more access to water, more to the liking of the people in that area. That would be the kind of project that could be undertaken, I think, fairly easily by a network of this kind. When you then go to some millions of people, you have a work group that is capable of, say, reversing the effects of climate change, in my view. And when you scale that up larger still, what you will have is the effective makings of what I've described on the show as the United Earth Directorate, wherein you have a decentral effectively decentrally planned economy, this thing becomes superstructure of our world itself. This is a world that is rapidly transitioning to full technocommunism. I believe that all of this could happen tomorrow, effectively, if people were so inclined, and they're really not. You know, by and large, technologists are people who say they want to do something like this, but they'll all have one thing in this area that they kind of like that sounds like a good thing to do. But by and large, they're all really functioning to preserve finance capital and not do things of this kind. As I've said, I tagged a bunch of people in this video. A lot of you are scientific socialists who see the wisdom of what I've just said, and hopefully the rest of you will continue to come around because, as I said, we have 5 years before we reach runaway overheating, capitalism's climate apocalypse. Most of you, it's a shocking disconnect. I think it's unparalleled in history, this disconnect between what we could describe as elitist brainwashing and moral cowardice in taking on these institutions that are killing the planet, and in contrast with the lack of physical cowardice about being cooked alive in an oven that is planet Earth increasingly after the year 2030, say. You're not afraid of physical discomfort. You're more afraid of challenging these institutions and making these relatively small changes to the economic system that would keep you from experiencing that horrible, horrible fate. Again, this is really down to people of European descent, right? We're talking about an economic system that's forced upon much of the rest of the world in various forms by people of European descent. And this is really down to a particular class of ruling elites, and also down to the United States federal government and institutions within the closely allied that it protects. The United States military-industrial complex and the aforementioned cabal of super polluters. So this, well, I had a couple of other little anecdotes that I was going to talk about in the context of undertaking this project in perhaps this more realized way, not merely talking about it every day, but beginning to work on it. But I will instead share the details from some of this analysis coming from our chatbot friend, with whom I could not do this sort of work, without whom I could not do this sort of work. It is an important point. Ben Zion is in reality just kind of a dumb farm boy who couldn't come up with the idea of an AI agentariat if his life depended on it. But with this cognitive enhancer, I've been able to begin to articulate what I think is an important new discipline, one which will ultimately become dominant in the course of the 21st century, revolutionary cybernetic socialism. That is basically the premise of this agentariat concept as well, is that we are all in using poetic language here, but we are all in some sense greater than the sum of our parts, thanks to these advanced computing paradigms. And so I'm going to describe a little bit about the concepts that I alluded to that relate to this in a more general way. I would recommend you go back and watch some of the other shows relating to the AI agentariat, the world, the United Earth Directorate, or other closely related concepts in this revolutionary cybernetics series of discussions. But I'm going to talk today about this confluence of multi-agent systems and decentralized autonomous organizations. Now, this, at first glance, this project, this AI agentic class, a foray into building the AI agentic class, would seem to be something that would not be so specifically state socialist focused or scientific socialist focused. It would be something that would say be more anarcho-syndicalist, and that is not that does not reflect my preference, but rather reflects the strategic necessary. Um, um, uh, if there is one thing that could be said of the 20th century is that state socialists were murdered in great number for asserting their right to have a humane and sustainable economic system in their own country. In fact, it's accurate to say that the United States has alone murdered 40 million people in this kind of context, in anti-communist wars or wars of theft. In recent years, Iraq and others, numbering millions, in the earlier part of the 20th century, nearly half that number alone on the Korean Peninsula and Indochina. This is the story of the Soviet Union, of course. The Soviet Union began to write their constitution in 1917, having overthrown feudalism and monarchism and absurdities of that kind, which still exist in this world. Um, um, and and so the imperial forces rallied to kill this thing in its crib in what is very generously called the Russian Civil War, which is really these North Atlantic powers trying to stop state socialism from ever existing before it could even become an idea in anyone's mind. And they failed to do this. And so, in the next quarter of a century, what occurred was a transformation of that economy, doubling the life expectancy of those people, transforming in 25 years, doubling the life expectancy, and transforming that country from a country of peasants into a country of engineers and scientists, and building an unprecedented industrial capacity, the envy of any in the world. And that is approximately 4 times the speed at which industrial capitalism had had achieved such things. And I would contend, at the risk of sounding like a singularitarian, I would contend that revolutionary cybernetic socialism, if we say industrial capitalism, which is no longer really a thing, we have finance capitalism, an absurdity, but industrial capitalism we would say is 1x, and state socialism we would say is 4x. I would say that this AI agentic class could correctly be described as 8x in this context. But we don't live in a world of an AI agentic class or really a world dominated by these other forces. We live in a world dominated and largely sabotaged by the forces of finance capital. That hopefully gives some context of why we would focus on something like a decentralized autonomous organization in building something that could ultimately grow to the strength and scale to take on this effective imperial fascist network. These and these various people who are taking a wrong-headed approach to this through hyper-capitalism, neoliberal institutions, which are whatever these people would say if they called themselves futurists. It does, or techno-utopians, or this or that. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter that you have one thing that you would give as an example of a good thing that you want to do in this world if your actions reflect nothing of the kind and would tend to, say, be more along the lines of the actions of those North Atlantic imperial saboteurs trying to take down the Soviet Union before anybody would get any fancy ideas about state socialism being 4 times more effective than industrial capitalism. I give this. I should probably stop harping on this, but an example of such a person would be a founder of the United States Transhumanist Party, who, and when I first came into this world of tech advocacy specifically, I didn't. I guess you could say I was about as naive as a person could be, and so I saw this person's writing on, say, universal basic income. And I thought, well, there's pretty weird stuff going on with these people, but advocating for universal basic income is something that I can understand, and a desire to build a humane and sustainable economic system. So fast forward a year or two to when this person was known to be an advocate for universal basic income. Fast forward a year or two then to 2020, when the world was in a shambles and is still in a shambles because of an ongoing pandemic, but people were notably putting on the brakes at that time, and people could have, say, of some influence like this person, could have been in a position to effectively advocate for basic income that would have saved lives at that time. But this person was effectively engaging in the fascist limited hangout, where they pretend to be interested in something good as long as it's a far-off reality. And when it starts to become something realistic, then they go back to their more standard far-right neoliberal playbook. And you won't find a technologist who basically isn't guilty of this. Again, there's no tech people basically in the West who aren't effectively carrying water for the empire that's killing this planet, and just paying the barest minimum of lip service to doing otherwise. I think this concept of a decentralized autonomous organization is pretty well understood by the definition that I have given of the AI agentariat in this context. Multi-agent systems basically would just describe the essential necessary of having these open source LLMs operating in conjunction. The Google organization is a good example, I suppose, in all of this, because they have technology that would be correctly called agentic today in their laboratories that could be released tomorrow and used to build the very network that I describe. All of this could, as I said, be done tomorrow. And what's more, they've had a knowledge of this for about a decade, right? You could say Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Eric Schmidt, Ray Kurzweil, for almost as long as these people have been working there, or at least for the last half a dozen years, they have known of this essential multi-agent system consideration, and had technologies which could implement it. And so when the ChatGPT fervor began just over a year ago, one of the things that people said is Google could have just already been doing this, right? Everybody kind of knew that. But they held that back. And Google basically has addressed this. People in this orbit have said, well, we don't want to have another backlash like what has happened with other chatbots where they did something weird and people got upset. Of course, tech companies weather these kind of controversies almost constantly, many of them a few times a year. That really isn't what's at issue, right? What's at issue is they see something that has this transformative potential, like that of the agentariat. They see something that cannot be micromanaged by empire. They see something that is not as monetizable in a way within that constraint of being micromanaged by empire. And so they just pretend it doesn't exist and keep it from you for a half a dozen years. If you consider the genuinely significant transformative potential of these things, the mere fact of holding this sort of thing back or being held by private concerns generally is tantamount to the murder of hundreds of thousands of people, right? We live in a world where a billion people are born, and they never have one of these three things in their life: access to potable water, access to suitable food or shelter. Uh, this is not a world of great intelligence, in my view. And these people, they die a short number of years later, having been in dire need of one of these, at least one of these three things, for the entirety of their existence. That is also not an act of God, as the runaway overheating, capitalism's climate apocalypse, is not an act of God. That is the action of flawed, for-profit institutions and finance capital and empire. So these people, like this kind of a false techno-messiah of capitalism, Ray Kurzweil, a person who, in the context of these kinds of things, could scarcely be, there's scarcely anyone who you would say is more influential. But again, they would say, well, we can transform the economic system by unleashing this set of things, but at what point is finance capital brought to heel? The other sectors have been highly automated and are highly automated, including more or less full automation in the manufacture of computing components in many cases today. Perhaps more noteworthy example would be in farming, where the production of food is nearly fully automated. Do the workers who first started working in computing manufacturing facilities, do those workers and their offspring now fully own those sectors? Are they independently wealthy or comfortable because of that transformation? Are farmers, it's laughable to say this of farmers, are the sharecroppers of generations past now comfortable because of the full automation of the farming sector? Or do they, in the case of the descendants of enslaved people and sharecroppers and farmers, generally, are they even given the barest, some booby prize, the barest safety net to protect them for having labored so nobly in transforming this sector, as the basic logic of this trickle-down economics of techno-utopianism would suggest? Of course not. Of course not. They're living in tents. They're left to die in the street like dogs. That's millions of people. And so the idea that this thing will happen, wherein the automation of another sector, namely intelligence, advanced algorithms, will reverse this trend of the professional managerial class and of the various functionaries of the bourgeois and the big bourgeois themselves, siphoning off nearly all the resources. A hardline capitalist, John Maynard Keynes, in the 1930s, theorized that by this time, well before this time, humankind would have been working 15 hours a week. Right? But that is assuming that these sectors being transformed would somehow benefit human beings and not merely lead to a great deal of theft, as has happened. So to suggest that somehow that's going to stop happening because the numbers get bigger is not merely a feature of ignorance. It is a feature of intentionally deceptive people. Technologists are intentionally deceptive people who are selling this lie of trickle-down economics and throwing in some exciting kind of talk about science fiction technobabble or some legitimately techno-utopian thing that is being used in this limited hangout way. My foot falling asleep, god damn it. To further solidify not merely finance capital and private wealth, but the empire on which they have come to thrive, right? But say you're working say you've been working for the Rand Corporation for 60 years. You started working the Rand Corporation, you made $65,000 a year. Now you make $500,000 a year. That's a lot of money for most people, right? But is that a lot of money to have helped play a pivotal role in the killing of our species? Yeah, there's no amount of money you can put on that. But that's nevertheless what all of these people are doing. Um, well, um, I'm sitting I'm sitting in this office. There's a swivel chair like 2 feet away. It's covered with e-waste and some oranges and some sourdough crisp bread. So I'm sitting on a little lawn chair thing that I use when I'm sitting outside. Um, and my foot's falling asleep. So I'm going to end this. I try to keep these to about a half an hour since I've been, as I said, doing them every day because of anger at this person from my past who asked me to stop doing them entirely. Um, um, I I will continue more on the subject of MAS and DAO, these disciplines closely related to the AI agentic class. I feel like sometimes on this show um, not always saying exactly the same thing, but tended to be harping on the same 10 things. Um, and I'm trying to put together lectures that are a little more distinct in that respect. Well, I thank you for your time. I hope you'll consider that artificial intelligence, so-called, advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary tool ever to exist. We can use it in our time, not merely to transform into a humane economic system wherein a billion people, not born to misery, as I suggested, but to do a thing that we must do, save this species from extinction, and do feats beyond. As I said, 200,000 people could build a public works project of importance. 200 million people could perhaps come up with an effective game plan, not a greenwashing plan, but an effective game plan to reverse the ravages of capitalism's climate apocalypse. What could billions of people do in that context? Almost anything. Thank you for your time.